Hey everyone, thanks for joining me this Friday. I think it's late morning here for some and early afternoon for others. So I appreciate you tuning in to discuss the SEC's 20649 and 38A2, the new cybersecurity regulation. I did start a recording, so I'll pass around afterwards a copy of this webinar to anyone that wants to pass it around their team, so that will come to you if you're registered for the webinar here. For those that don't know me, my name is Brian Hahn with M Tradecraft. I'm a cybersecurity consultant and I work with SEC registered firms. I consult with them on really two things. One is securing their network and how to do that, and two is how to build the compliance documentation around that. We want to work with our clients in an unbiased way, and without, there's no ongoing cyber IT services that I sell. And I say that just as kind of a preface to as we get into this webinar and start talking about some of these things, so you understand my point of view. And I always like to give these webinars in a way that you understand what's needed from you, and if you wanted to go and do it yourself, you certainly have the knowledge and tools to do that. So today we'll talk about 20649. I'll spend the first half of the webinar kind of at a high level, touching on what the regulation is going to stipulate for cybersecurity. And then we will get in a more technical level, and I'll show you a few ideas about how I help my clients kind of work through this, and show you some of the tools and techniques that I use if you want to implement these in your firm to make it a little bit easier to comply with 20649. So high-level overview, we're in February, I can't ever remember if it was February or March of this year, the SEC announced 20649 and opened up a short comment period on it. But essentially, we're moving from a period of cybersecurity guidance from the SEC to a period of cybersecurity regulation. Whereas prior to 20649, every couple of years, it seems we would have gotten an OC release that said, these are the best practices that we're seeing throughout our cybersecurity. These are the best cybersecurity practices that we're seeing throughout our examination. This is what we recommend you do. To now we're moving to a period of regulation where we're actually going to have rules written in regards to cybersecurity. So it's an interesting period. If you haven't read 20649, I think it's 234 something pages. It's fairly detailed, and I'll give you the high level Cliffs Notes version of it today. The SEC also has an awesome little 2-pager, which you can see up here on the screen, that I recommend that you download as part of your program, just to understand what's expected from you. And again, I'll dive into more details on these issues in today's webinar. So let's talk about the Pilars of 20649 and what it's going to stipulate. And I know a lot of firms already have a lot of these things because they were responding to regulation SID or regulation SP. And so a lot of these things are already in place. We're just going to see them now in different sets of regulation and more defined structure about what is required from them. Most everyone that I work with generally has some sort of cybersecurity policies and procedures manual. The biggest problem I see that most clients have is they have more of a policies manual and without the procedures manual going into it. So that's something that the SEC is going to want to see, where you're definitely balancing both within that manual. And of course, that's going to be an internal document. 20649, and this is one of the issues that really is worrisome to me, just for the amount of information that will be released. There's going to be regulatory disclosure of incidents required, and this is going to be on a new form ADVC. And so this is going to be a requirement to any time there is a cybersecurity incident, it will need to be reported to the regulators. There's also going to be the required disclosure of cybersecurity risks to clients, and that's going to be done on your narrative in Form ADV Part 2A. So, generally some of the threat assessment or risk assessment that you go through, you'll want to be using some of the language in that to explain to your clients in your Part 2A what's going to be required for them. It's also going to touch on proper cyber record keeping. So, logs, keeping logs from servers, keeping logs from routers, keeping reports from where scans were done, keeping audit reports. And of course, these are all internal documents, but it is going to stipulate record keeping, which we'll dive into a little bit more. Other stipulations, you're also going to see required annual cybersecurity reviews and a documentation of the review. And that's important. I'll circle back to that because that's going to be a process that if you don't build right from the beginning, it's going to be tedious as you continue operations and continue to comply with these regulations that are coming down. So, the solutions we want to discuss and how to tackle this as a firm is we want something that's scalable. It can help us do those annual reviews and keep that ongoing documentation. And we're also going to see where a board of directors or a cybersecurity designee needs to sign off on reviews, audits, and any changes to the cybersecurity policy. The overall idea here is that the SEC wants to make sure that the executive team is engaged at the cybersecurity level and understands what's going on, what's going on in that department. So, in terms of just pure documentation, the ones that I generally like to have for my clients is, of course, that policies and procedures manual. I also like to have an employee technology usage agreement, and you're going to see this stipulated in the user access rights part of 20649 that we'll discuss a little bit. But I use the employee technology usage agreement. It's a simple 2-pager that stipulates how they can interact with firm equipment, firm domains, email services, that sort of thing. So I like to have employees sign that in onboarding and also attest to it annually during your annual review. You're going to need some cybersecurity awareness training. I see a couple of you are already using our Fieldcraft program. It's a really cool program, simple to use, and tackles cybersecurity compliance training in about 10 minutes for you guys. So if you're not doing some kind of training internally, I encourage you to check that out as a solution. If you have less than 10 employees, we actually have a free solution for you as well. You can go through some training. But some form of training is going to need to be documented as part of that annual review. And I also like to leave my clients with just a repository of what I call the cybersecurity logs, the reports, the domain maps, the network scans, the audits, the records, all of this stuff in a repository so that in the event of an SEC examination, we have a simple spot that we can go to and source any of the information that we may need to build our response to the SEC. So let's dive into the policies and procedures manual. So one of the things 20649 is it's going to actually stipulate what needs to be covered in this manual. So everything needs to be, again, making sure we are not only policies, but procedures. So one of the things I want to see is how you're conducting risk assessment, risk and threat assessments, both internally, whether that's through vulnerability scans or through your due diligence with vendors. So that's always a tricky one, and I know a lot of firms have struggled with how to tackle that and going forward. There's a couple cool solutions out there that I know some firms are using. So that's definitely something you might want to investigate because having that vendor due diligence on file is going to be required. The other key thing that you'll see repeated over and over in this regulation is the mention of individual employee security and user access rights. So just the idea that employees should be using one secure devices. So we want to have a discussion on how we're securing those devices and what policies and procedures we're going through to do that, but also what access to systems do they have. Accounting shouldn't have access to trading software, and trading shouldn't have access to accounting software, things of this nature. So we want to have a way to map that out and have a good understanding of, what systems do employees have access to. You're also going to need to spell out your information protection protocols. What do you actually do to protect data? What are the methods that, the proactive methods that you've implemented to protect data, so on and so forth. And what are you doing about cybersecurity threat and vulnerability management? So I've done a lot of scans. I've never done a single scan where I didn't find at least one vulnerability. There's always something that you can work on to make your firm just a little bit stronger. And so, you need to have a defined process for one, how are you going to go about those? How are you going to tackle those threats? And two, who's in charge of it? And also your response and recovery. So if you experience a ransomware attack or you have an employee open a phishing email, what does your response look like and what are your recovery efforts? And what are your recovery capabilities? Those all need to be covered. It's a report of not only perceived threats, but also past events. So you have to report on threats that may happen, which and I'll digress a minute here. This is one of those ones that's kind of hard to figure out. Just about every firm you can think of is susceptible to an employee clicking a phishing link. And so how do we word that to make sure that we are disclosing it? Of course, we have employees that are capable of making a mistake and clicking a phishing link without alerting the general public. So I think, this is definitely one of those situations you'll want to work with your attorneys on. Of course, full disclosure, I'm not an attorney. I'm just kind of throwing out my ideas here on how you would want to tackle that. The other thing, and if anyone has any insight onto this, please feel free to chime in. But the other thing that the SEC mentions is that this will probably need to be uploaded in an XBRL format, which is a machine readable tagging. I've actually never done that before. I don't know if anyone's experienced that or what that's like and how. And I'm curious for someone to chime in and see if how would you tag that information. But that might be a discussion for a different day as this becomes implemented. But anyway, that's going to be, some of the requirements when you report to your prospects and clients on that Part 2A, Form ADV Part 2A. There's also going to be regulatory reporting, and that's going to be on that new Form ADVC. So right now, the way the regulation's written is this must be filed within 24 hours of incident, which is an insane response time. I can tell you from a practical standpoint, you're going to have, once you recognize a compromise, you're going to have a really hard time filling out a comprehensive report without giving away too much or giving away false information within 24 hours. So perhaps, when the final ruling hits at the beginning of the year, we'll see some changes there. But right now it's written at 24, which is going to be challenging. And excuse me, I know if you read through the comment period, a lot of consultants and attorneys and cybersecurity experts mentioned in the comments to the SEC about that time frame. So it could be that it changes. Right now, the SEC is kind of addressed and says, well, you'll just file what you know within 24 hours and then update this form as needed and frequently as your investigation unfolds. And so they're looking overall just for the reporting of any instances that affect operations and confidentiality of data. So again, it's going to be just really hard to determine within 24 hours what exactly happened to affect those type of situations. And so this is one that will be that I think will be difficult for a lot of firms. 20649 also touches on record keeping, and the stipulation is for 5 years. A few of the things that it mentions throughout those 234 pages, I think it is a keeping cyber policies and procedures versions for the past 5 years, documentation of your annual reviews. So again, that's going to be one that could be tedious for a lot of firms if you don't set it up right from the beginning, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. But keeping all your documentation related to audits, your regulatory filings, if you've had any, you're definitely going to have them on your Form ADV Part 2A, which you're going to keep copies of anyway as part of your other record keeping requirements. But if you do have to file that Form ADVC for some kind of incident, you'll have to keep your own records of that, of course. And then your written risk and threat assessments. That's some we've covered in detail in other videos, so you can check those out on the YouTube channel if you're interested in watching some of those videos about how to conduct written threat assessments and risk assessments. That's something that you'll definitely want to keep your copies of. And of course, your cyber insurance policies. And again, jumping back to that board approval or, the cybersecurity designee approval, you'll want to keep documentation of those approvals for the past 5 years. So that's overview. That's, those are the things that are going to be required. I think each firm is going to have their own way of approaching this or their own way of setting up operations. And I want to talk about some of those here kind of going forward. So it's going to get a little bit technical. But there's, I want to show some solutions that I've taken to my clients and had them use. And these are things that I've used with hundreds of firms, and they implement very nicely throughout. So again, for those do-it-yourselfers, you can certainly take, what I'm going to show you today and build that out on your own firm. Or of course, if you like, the way we set this up for our clients, we're certainly happy to help you with that as well. So on the technical side, there's a few things I want to cover today. The domain and network maps. I love building graphical maps of how data is flowing throughout the network, and building maps of just every bit of IT information that we can find. So we have inventories of serial numbers, MAC addresses from all our devices, through a list of all cloud services, email services, so on and so forth. I love to build those into graphical maps. So I'll talk about that. I'll talk about how I put together the threat and risk reports, and also tackling vulnerability management. So, how do we scan a network? How do we understand what vulnerabilities are there? And then how do we tackle that going forward with a team? And then I'll also talk about cloud audits. They're a little bit different than vulnerability management in the way that you tackle them. I mean, in some ways they're the same, but because they're in the cloud and because these are not devices that we own, we don't own the cloud computers, we're not going to get permission to scan them for vulnerabilities. So we have to go about cloud audits in a little bit different way, which, unfortunately just adds to the compliance complexity that's going to be associated with it. A lot of firms made a huge move to the cloud, thinking that was, going to be a better solution for them. And in 20649, I think it'll be interesting how much people start pulling back from the cloud as they have to disclose the risk associated with what they're doing with the cloud. So that'll be interesting to watch as kind of a side note. But again, just an overview of some of the technical things I want to cover here. So as an overview, I'm going to kind of the process that I go through really relies on two pieces of software. One is called Maltego, and I pay these license prices just as you would if you decide you want to implement these in your firm. Maltego costs $1,000 a year for a license, and I use that for a lot of things. It literally becomes my central hub for reporting and auditing firms and letting firms be compliant. I use it to build network maps, to track the employee user access rights, to conduct and threat intelligence work, reputation management. It's an extremely versatile piece of software. You can really go in and update it any way that you need for it to fit to your firm. So I use Maltego to organize all of this data. And then I use Nessus as a vulnerability scanner. The product I use might be overkill for some smaller firms. So I think they do have some price points around the $3,000 a year range if you're only scanning a few number of IPs. But if if you're scanning more than probably 50 IPs, you're going to be looking at roughly $4,900 a year for the Nessus license. Nessus will cover a lot of territory. It'll do your external scans, your internal scans. It'll scan your cloud networks, and it'll provide you an interface that you can do your vulnerability management, scanning and management in real time, should that be an avenue that you want to pursue in your firm. So I stole this graphic out of this sales brochure, just because I think it does a good job of presenting an elementary representation of what we're trying to do in terms of building a foundation for cybersecurity monitoring, and of course from that monitoring building a compliance program. So if you think about the intranet there, that could represent your office, so offices may have application servers going on. They may not. You may be fully in the cloud. You're going to have some workstations that are used by employees to do their jobs. And so, within the internal office, there's going to be a few items that we want to check. We want to make sure that our endpoints, our Windows systems, our MacBooks are properly configured, updated, and patched. If we are running servers, we're going to want to make sure they're updated and patched. And we're want to show, proof of that. Of course, we have remote offices now with people working from home. So we want to make sure that those are secure locations, both through kind of policies and procedures, and of course, through doing scanning and making sure that the network is secure. And then, of course, any DMZ zones or cloud services that you may be using. The way we go through and do the cloud audit is we essentially, compare it to a known benchmark, a known secure benchmark, and see if our configuration aligns with that. So this is the elementary version of the map, and I actually like to build a map like this for my clients that represents their actual network and helps organize this information in a similar fashion. I found that it goes over pretty well in the SEC. Again, I definitely encourage you to check out the YouTube channel. I have some demonstrations where I go into more details of Maltego and how I use this. I'm not going to pull up the program today and go through it. I'm going to stay here at the slide level and show some screenshots. But if it's something you're interested in, I definitely encourage you to check out those videos and see more about how the actual software works and interacts. But what you're looking at here is an organization of records for a very small firm that I pulled in just to have a representation here. So each dot represents a different entity within the domain. So it might be an IP address for a computer. It might be an IP address for a VoIP phone or an email server or a web server. All of these things that firms use would be represented by a dot. And when you click on the dot, it'll give you further detail on that particular item. So I think I'll show some examples here in a little bit, but if I click on a Windows machine, it'll tell me what version of Windows it's running, is it properly updated, so on and so forth. So I build this as the security dashboard just because it does a lot of these things for me in one location. When my clients, I typically use it for the network mapping. I use it to build that IT checklist, so if you get that odd request from the SEC, it's like, how many Windows machines are you using? It's really simple to come in here and pull the names of the Windows machines that you're using. So I use it as like an IT checklist or asset list. It does my patch management, shows proof of patch management. So we use Nessus to scan the endpoints, and those are uploaded here to show that they've been scanned and patched. And also works with threat and vulnerability management, user access rights. I mean, it really is just a workhorse of a piece of software for managing a firm's cybersecurity compliance. So I'm a big fan of it. Again, full transparency. I'm a client of theirs just like you would be, but it is an awesome piece of software that I've been able to implement throughout different firms to help them, build this cybersecurity compliance ecosystem within their firm. So diving in a little bit, if you zoom in, here's a kind of a close-up example of what this looks like at the graphical level. At the top, you can see we're using a firm, Vela Ford, and Vela Ford owns velaford.com as a domain, and John Doe is an employee of Vela Ford. You can see below I have a link to John Doe's email address and a link to his cell phone number, as well as a line that shows that he has admin access to the secure.velaford.com domain. And so if you click on John Doe, you'll get all this information over to the right. You'll see like properties there. You can enter title, user access rights. You can enter any kind of custom property here that you want to track information about the employee and what access they have. You can even attach documents and that sort of thing to that particular employee. So it's really versatile in how you can use it to track user access rights. And it for me, Maybe some people aren't graphical and they like Excel more. The thing I like about Maltego is you can easily take it and export that information into Excel as well, so that you would have this in that format. If you zoomed in on that secure.velaford.com, here we would map the different ports and services and systems that are running on that particular domain. The idea here is that we want to know everything about our systems. We want to know what ports are open. This gives us a map to know what we need to scan for vulnerabilities. And of course, also gives us proof to the SEC that, hey, we are, actually mapping and testing this stuff. I'll say another huge advantage to this is whenever there's a new vulnerability that comes out, let's say Log4j, which was a recent one, which affected JavaScript. It's super easy to come into Maltego here and do a quick search for JavaScript and see what systems you have that might be running JavaScript, so that you can go in and make sure those are patched. Again, so Maltego just becomes a workhorse. I use it again for the patch management and doing the vulnerability scans. When I find a vulnerability, I use it for collaboration too with the other teams on how to make sure we're getting it fixed and working together about all known information. So I'll show you an example of that here in a minute. Here's another example of what that map would look like internally. So that secure.velaford.com would have been an example of what data we would track externally on a domain. This is an example of what information we would track internally. Here you can see the Dunder Mifflin branch in Scranton. There are two systems connected at the moment of the scan. One was a scanner and one was a computer named Pam. The idea here is that we just want to track all information about those systems. What software are they running? Is it updated? Is it patched? What two-factor authentication may be in place, what SSL certificates are in place. All of that information we want to capture here in Maltego. Again, it just makes having this information all in one place makes it that much easier to respond to any SEC regulatory request, or one of the hot things I've seen lately is requests from the custodians to see samples of this type of scanning and auditing. So again, it's just super easy to respond to those type of requests with this documentation. Here's an example. If you took that John Doe email address that we talked about a minute ago, one of the things that I like to do with Maltego is also do a bit of my threat and risk management in there. So one of the workflows that I do for my clients, and I recommend everyone do for their firms, is keep track of your email addresses and the active breaches that they've been involved in. A lot of employees use their work email address for LinkedIn or Adobe, or any of these others that had Uber. Was the other one, Drizzly, during, everyone had Drizzly during COVID, and their licenses were exposed, actual photographs of their licenses. You want to know that information. You want to know what breach data has already been out there about your firm. So if I take the email address johndoe.com and run it through some dark web searches and run it through services like Have I Been Pwned, I can start to find where this email address has been involved in past breaches. And so what I'll do is, you can see here on the second row, I'll map the different breaches where I found the email address was in, and give a little bit of information about that breach, just so we know what happened, what information was taken. And then down below, I'll map the different pieces of information that I was actually able to collect. Again, so, here you can see with John Doe here, we were able to get his driver's license from the AudiUSA.com breach. We got social security numbers, vehicle details, usernames, passwords, IP addresses, partial credit card data. There's a lot of information here that we would use if we were going to attack the firm. Of course, when we do this type of threat assessment, we definitely want to go to John and say, hey, John, we found the password you were using at LinkedIn is password 123, and we looked at our internal records and you're using the same password throughout all our systems. That is a threat. That is a risk. So we want to be aware of those type of things when we do these assessments. I also like to look at what files are published on the website. This is one I think clients miss a lot. I have a lot of clients that just publish PDF after PDF onto their website without cleaning any of the metadata behind it. So when I'm going through, I can see the exact versions of Adobe that were used to create the different PDFs that were put out there. I can see their usernames. And that becomes important in a phishing attack, because if I know the exact version of Adobe that they're using, I can more specifically develop an attack that will be successful on there. So little things like that I like to include in the threat assessment, and then map that out using Maltego. It makes that pretty simple to do. And now jumping to internal vulnerability management. So I use Nessus for that. And this is the screen that it looks like in Nessus. This is an actual screenshot from one of my clients after scanning an internal network. Each line represents a different host or a different IP address. So, laptops, VoIP phones, printers, scanners, these things are all given different IP addresses. So we organize the scan by IP address. Again, this is just a screenshot, but in a live demo, if you click on vulnerabilities up here, it would drill down into the particular vulnerabilities and discuss what's involved and how you need to fix them. So Nessus, it's very expensive, but it does an amazing job of pulling this data together and giving clients a central database to go to manage these vulnerabilities. And this data can all be, so you create the scans in Nessus, you develop your structure there, and you can easily port this over into Maltego for that one-stop shop for all your data. Jumping back to cloud services. So, when we do an external scan and we do an internal scan, like with the internal scan, I'm actually sending a device to the client and we're scanning through the network, and I'm talking to the different computers and scanning them for vulnerabilities. Well, we can't do that with cloud services. Again, it's, there's a lot of different people using one server or the honeycomb servers, and they're not going to get permission to myself or a firm like us to go out and do those type of scannings. So there's a little bit different way that you do your cloud services, your Azure, your AWS, your Salesforce deployments. What you want to do is take the configuration file and compare it against a known benchmark, like the CIS Security Foundations benchmark is one that we like to use. A benchmark of a known good security settings. And when you do that, what you get is a report that kind of looks like this, so like up at the top, it failed ensuring multi-factor authentication and is enabled for all users. We definitely want to make sure all the users have multi-factor authentication in place. So if we were to click on that fail, it would drill down and tell us who needs to implement that, and we can go after them and make sure that they have that in place. So again, a little bit different approach to cloud services, but same overall end result, and that you know where your vulnerabilities might be and have a clear solution on how to fix them with Nessus. So that's it, guys. That's all I have for you today. I hope that gives you a little more oversight into what's coming your way with 20649. In terms of the way we work with clients, it's changing a little bit. It's a lot of the same stuff, because even before 20649, we would see these requests coming on the back end from the SEC. So we're already producing documentation in this way with our clients. So honestly, for us, it's a little bit more of a clear guidance on, so it does provide some clarity in a nebulous world, which is great and helps us make sure we can put the client in a compliant manner. So I hope that's helpful for you and gives you an overview. And for those that want to tackle it yourself, I hope that gives you a little insight into what I've used and what I found to be successful in doing this type of work in a seamless way, and a way that works, both in a secure way and a compliant way, right? Like that's always our balance. We want to have secure and compliant operations. So again, if you need help with any of this, I'd certainly love to help you out with that, on a project basis, to come in and help you get these reports and audits done. So again, I appreciate you joining us this Friday, and certainly hope you guys have a great afternoon and a good weekend ahead. Of course, if anyone has questions, please feel free to reach out. And give me a little bit of time as I get the audio and video out put together, and then I'll get this sent around. So again, thank you all much. Hope you have a great weekend.